whatever tunes your knees to mush the hip, the lift, even if you gotta sift through the shit to get to the twist. The smile I hide like it's your very last line. You'll never get another try. Do it loud, do it for the round, for the here and now.
All right. Hello, everyone. I know middle of the day interview is not a very common thing, but my guest today, Karl Sieling from Connecticut, we have difficult time having our schedules match up. He's a grandfather and retired, but he's not available in the late afternoons where most people have their interviews. So we had to schedule it now, and that's okay because it will be recorded and anybody can come in later and watch it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull Karl in. Hey, Karl, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, good, Randy. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, Karl and I have been friends for a while now on Facebook, and I keep up with all of the things that he posts. He actually owns the Connecticut Bigfoot Research page on Facebook, and I'm going to tell you, when we go over this interview tonight, the man has done his homework in that area, especially the area around where he lives and lived as a child. And there's a lot of good things going on there that you're going to be interested in. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Karl. How did you guys end up in that area? Have you been there your whole life? You know, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. My dad moved us out of the city up in Bridgeport when I think I was like 3. It was back in 64. And bought a house on the lake. Literally had the dock. I mean, we were lakefront right on Lake Zor, part of the Housatonic River. The road we lived on was about a 1.5 miles long, dead end, which dead end into the Augusta State Forest. Grew up in Newtown, right on the Monroe line, the town line. Stevenson Dam's right there. So if people want to look up, the area where it is. Basically, went to school in Newtown, went a couple years in my high school, first couple years over in Monroe. That's where I ended up meeting a lot of my real close friends. Joined the firehouses. They had, juniors there. We were able to join when we were 12. All the kids in the neighborhood's parents either belonged to the firehouse one way or the other, whether it's, senior people, the guys, or the moms were ladies auxiliary, things like that. So it's a pretty tight knit group. Had a lot of kids in the neighborhood, pretty much the same age.
So Karl, you were not only part of the fire service, you were also part of the police force.
Yep. Back in 81, okay. I joined auxiliary with the police department in Newtown. Dispatched, got put on as a patrol officer, and ended up leaving there in the end of 89, and joined State Corrections in 90.
So did you also serve in the military?
Nope. The only closest I did was Coast Guard Auxiliary. I did 19 and a half years.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, so here's a man who has actively chosen in his career fields or volunteerism or whatever he's done in the matter of service to others. So that brings a lot of credibility to the table. When you're going to tell us what happened to you as a boy in that area, that should lay the groundwork of who you are as a person. So that's always beneficial. I like to know who a person is away from this Bigfoot arena, because a lot of time that carries over into what kind of researcher you are.
Yep. Well, I mean, being in a small police department, we did a lot of our own investigating, whether it be motor vehicle fatalities or burglaries or assaults or traffic accidents, or just going to get the neighbor's cow because it got out and put them back in the fence.
Yeah. We lived on the outskirts of a small town, and yeah, there were lots of times horses, cattle would get out, and who do you call? I mean, you have to come round, you have to round some livestock up on occasion.
Yep. It was interesting, but I mean, it was good growing up there. At the end of the road I grew up on was a state forest, Progressive State Forest. It's pretty large. It borderlines the Housatonic River and the Lake Zor section of the Housatonic River, which goes up into the Chippewa Dam, and then it goes up into Bridgewater and Brookfield up that way onto Lake Lillonona. It's divided by two hydroelectric dams.
Okay, well, I'd like to bring to everyone's attention the pictures that I'm going to be showing about this area is from the current map today on Google Earth. So there's a lot more houses and a lot more buildup than you can believe, because a lot of this storyline is going to be happening, almost 50 years ago, 69, 70, when you were a young boy, running these woods with your friends and had these things that happened to you there. So I'm going to show two pictures. The first picture is this picture here that shows from an eagle eye view of that area where these four instances happened, all within a very close range of each other, within 5-minute drive of each one of these locations. So it's a very concentrated area. And I'm going to show a picture that Karl sent me. This is an older picture. The view is from the northeast of this location, but it's a 3D view. So I want you to see what a better view of the lay of the land and how thick that little cove right there at the north end of the lake is Eckler's Cove, and we will be discussing that at some point. But I just wanted to let you see this view looking out across that wooded forestry area, and that's generally where a lot of this stuff happens. So it is not sparse at all when it comes to tree cover.
Oh, it's back in the day, in those areas, a lot of farmland. A lot of it's been developed now, where there's just $1 million houses and big developments and everything, but it's quickly getting eaten up by civilization.
Yeah, what a shame. So let's go back in time when Karl is a young child, or young man, young boy. I remember when I was 11, we lived out on a dirt road, lived across the street from a junkyard that was probably 100 acres. My God, we played in that junkyard all day long. Creeks, we would make our own boats. We would swing across the creek, a mile away from our house all day long. Parents never knew where we were at, and as long as you come home at dark. And that was what my boyhood was like at that particular place. I imagine I can compare that to what your childhood was like at that age, 10, 11 years old, where it was, you had the freedom to just take your bikes and just go out in the woods and just play.
Oh yeah. I mean, the only thing different, from what you're describing is we had woods. We didn't have a junkyard, but we had plenty of woods with the creeks, with the brooks, the lake, everything was right there. So.
All right. Well, this is going to start where I put the number 1 on that map. This is an area. I mean, I may not be exact where I put the 1, but it's somewhere in that area. There's like fire service roads and things like that running through those woods, and power line right of ways and things like that. So let's Karl take us back to that time when when they first discovered stuff happening in their playground.
You got to remember back then, none of this was, could it be Sasquatch, Bigfoot? This is just kids playing, noticing, forgetting about. So it's and a lot of it came back from watching different YouTube stations when it's on, somebody saying something on the YouTube station, and you're like, oh wait, I remember that when I was a kid. And piece by piece by piece, this whole thing started coming out over a few years, where when I started putting it down on paper and looking through Google Earth and watching a bunch of different YouTube videos and stories and, researchers and things like that, a little bit came back here and a little bit came back there. I was like, wow, I didn't even realize that. So
yeah, and that's really amazing, because it's almost like the subject of Sasquatch and Bigfoot is such an easier subject now, because so many people really have had somewhat activity or even sightings in their life, and now it's a much easier subject to cover. You're gonna mention how you were afraid to mention something that you saw to your friends because of ridicule and things like that. And that is such a common thing. And here you are, 40, 50 years later, putting all this together and saying, wow, they lived within this acreage. They were there because of all of these other things that happened. It's really fantastic.
Yep. I mean, like what we had, I had friends that lived on this little, like we lived on the private road, or the one-way road. They lived off of it on like a private drive. And then at the end of that private drive, there was a access fire road up to the power lines. And, I could remember being the first thing that I was able to remember was, it's summertime, we're like, we had to be like around 10, 11 years old at the time. Okay. Pretty much that picture right there. And, we walked up the power road, which back then was a lot more noticeable as a power road. Now it's there. You probably get in with a vehicle, but that's the kind of difference it is, as of today. But there was a field there that we used to go and play, pretty much right off the road. And I remember when we were kids, we went into the field and we noticed these giant, I'm going to call it a nest now, but back then we thought it was just like a big indentation where a deer would have put down the grass. Now the grass in these fields, when we were kids, I mean, it was like 3 feet high. So we thought it was really cool. We saw these, like, there had to be 4 or 5 of them, I remember at the one time, where we could put like 5 or 6 kids into this impression of grass on the ground. And then we would all grab our sticks and we would each take an impression, and we would be like bolt up over the grass, we'd have our stick guns, and like we're, bang, bang to each other, hiding and playing that way. And, that's what came back when I started seeing, different videos on nesting. Because they said it's not a deer nest, it's not a bear nest, it's much, much bigger.
Now, I'm sorry to interject. I'm going to be that way where when a question I think is pertinent, I'll toss it in. Now, I want everyone to know that your first inclination would think deer bedding. You would think deer bedding in a field would create multiple things like that. But in light of the other things that he is going to mention, that's when you start getting layers of things that make you say, all right, this could be Sasquatch.
Right, because in that same field, and I believe it was probably within the same 4 seasons, the fire road used to go up there, and the older kids in the neighborhood had snowmobiles. So they would run the snowmobiles up and down these fire roads, and we would take our runner sleds because it was so packed down and refrozen. We would get, one heck of a ride down this nice and long. Take us 45 minutes to walk up it, but that 5-minute ride was, well worth it back then. And I remember one time we were up there and we went into the field. I don't know why we went into the field, but I remember going into the field, and when we got there, there was one set of, I'm going to say tracks. I'm not going to say footprints. They were big, and we put our boots in. We had the snowmobile boots and stuff like that when we were kids, and they just were so tiny in these tracks, but they were one after another, all the way through to the end of the field. And we joked about it. We tried jumping from one track to another track, and being 10, 11 years, we couldn't even come close to reaching the track in front of us. We fell way short. And we used to joke about the giant. Must have been a giant that came through here and walked out into the woods, and it's like, there's no giants, blah, 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 fooling around as kids and stuff. And that never came back to me until I started watching. Like I said, there was a YouTube video on, and somebody said they had tracks going through the air. And I'm looking at this snow track in this field, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I can remember when I was a kid seeing the exact same thing I'm looking at. But it still didn't add. 1 + 1 didn't equal 2 yet. So I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. But as far as that area goes, that was really the only thing right there. And like I said, that was what, 50 years ago.
Okay, so according to this map, and I'm sure I got the numbers wrong, that is where the number 1 happened, in that field area there. Now, is the next incident that happened correct, that I have down there where the number 2 is, where you had a sighting on the railroad tracks?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to go into how much later was it that you had that sighting on the railroad track?
Okay, now this is, I think it was 1976. I'm 15 at the time. I remember it was the big bicentennial year. They had a Freedom train that used to come up and down the New Haven line. It was like all decorated red, white, and blue. It came through once or twice, and we thought that was a good thing. But where we lived on the lake, which is where you see the number 3, I was up about just at the top of the 3. My parents had the house on the lake. We moved over to where the number 2 is, which was a general store at the time, and my parents rented the house out on the lake. That's when we went to the Monroe, and I was going to the high school that time with the fire department, with the kids and stuff. And so I lost my track, my train of thought.
Well, I'm gonna pull up a picture showing a close up of the railroad tracks if I can find it. Let's see. Well, maybe I will, maybe I won't.
Oh,
there it is.
There it is. Okay, so we're at the top of that picture on the right-hand side, up at the top there. That large business that you see right there is the lumber yard. It was Stevenson Lumber. The house was literally right on that corner where the dots start. Okay, we had the road, and then the railroad tracks were right there. So I could say, I lived on the other side of the tracks. But if you came up the main road to go to my buddy's house, you'd have to walk all the way up the main road and then down towards the railroad tracks. And it would take you a half hour, 45 minutes to walk there, and it was basically all uphill until you got close to his house, which was downhill. So we used to cut through the tracks because he lived right on the other side of the tracks, about probably about the same distance, but it was a cut through, nice and level, nobody around, really peaceful. When we were kids, if the train was going slow enough, going up into Newtown, we just jump on one of the cars and get a free ride up there. But so, there's one day I decided, it was in the afternoon, right after noon. I don't know what I finished doing. Decided to walk over to my buddy's house. So I jumped on the tracks and I'm walking in between the rails, the steel rails.
So are you heading south on these tracks?
No, I'm heading west.
Okay.
I'm going west. And as I'm walking up the railroad tracks, I'm literally looking down as I'm stepping each step because it's so uneven with the railroad ties and the gravel that's all mixed in there. You kind of got to watch what you're doing. And I'm doing that because I don't want to trip, and go face first into the railroad ties. So I'm walking for about maybe 5-10 minutes at the most. And I'm looking down, very peaceful, beautiful day out. It was like end of July or August. And I trip. And I do, the old stub my toe, and then I lunged ahead to catch my balance, 4 or 5 steps, and then caught my balance and I stopped. Well, it was at that point when I stopped and I looked up, right dead center in the middle of the railroad tracks. It couldn't have been more than 75, 100 feet in front of me. Was this 8-9 foot tall, I describe it as a basketball looking silhouette. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, okay. I don't remember if I was excited. I don't remember if I was petrified. I don't remember any of that. But I remember looking at it, and then I looked at it for probably about 4 or 5 seconds, and then it turned to its right, and then went pretty quickly off the tracks over the little side, like fire road along the tracks, and then up into the woods. And I could hear it leaving. I could hear the crunch, 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 because it was gravel, shale type of, leaves going up that way. And it was, and what I saw was 8-9 feet as I'm looking up to it. I'm not looking directly at it in front of me. I'm kind of looking at an angle, so I was able to kind of justify how big it was. But it looked like like I said, it was it was very, very dark. So it reminded me of a silhouette, long arms, long legs, built like a buffed basketball player, kind of like a Shaq, but more beefy and taller. And I could tell it was nothing but hair or fur or whatever. It was like 4 or 5 inches long over the entire body. It had hands, it had feet, didn't make any sound, had a small head, which is kind of weird. I mean, if you're looking at proportion, long arms, long legs, big, tall thing, had this like little head on its shoulders. Like it didn't have a neck. It just had shoulders with this bump on it. I saw it turn. It didn't have any kind of a muzzle like a bear or, a moose. It had a flat face. Couldn't make out the face because of the way the sun was hitting. But everything that I was able to see, from feet to arms to hands to chest, everything was very, very, very dark.
So how old were you at this time, Karl?
Like 15.
Okay. Well, and I'd like to throw in there that I'm still thinking about what it would be like to have this happen, and I'm thinking, you're walking down the tracks with your head down. We've all walked on railroad tracks. I know exactly what you're talking about. You're looking for each railroad tie to step on,
right?
Because of the gaps in between them. So you're looking straight down as you're walking. So your head is looking straight down. And then when you stumble for the first time, who knows how long you had been walking, and the the Sasquatch was comfortable. He was comfortably protected in the fact that you were never looking up. So he was caught off guard when all of a sudden you stumbled just enough where you looked up and there he was. But it's amazing. I'm looking at it from his behavioral standpoint. I don't know how long he would stand there while you kept coming in that direction, but he certainly wasn't worried as long as you were looking at the ground.
Yeah. If you look at it that way, yeah, you're right. Because I was walking around, but 95% of the time I'm looking down at my feet, trying not to twist my ankle or stumble or something like that. And that's, what I ended up doing anyway. But, I had no smell. It didn't make any noise. The only noise I heard was from when it, walked away. When I say it walked away fast, most of us come upon a deer, they get startled and they jump away, pretty quick. It wasn't as fast as that, but it was pretty comparable to that. So it's like, I've heard a lot of places say, this thing was just so fast that I couldn't, keep my eyes on it and this and that. It walked away very quickly, but I don't think it ran away. And it didn't look like it really cared that I was there, besides, okay, I'm not going to stay here no more. I'm out of here.
Wow. So you had so did you actually struggle with whether or not you should tell anyone about that?
Well, I was literally like, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes walk from my buddy's house. And I remember getting there, never said nothing to him. And all I remember at that point was like, I'm going to move on. I'm not going to tell anybody about it. They're not going to believe me anyway. I remember the only thing at that point kind of reminded me, I might have thought of the $6 Million Man show at that point, saying, I wonder if that's what it's, what I saw. But, the one in there had bionic arms and things like that. So I don't know if at that time my brain processed it the right way, or it just shut down and put it out of it, because I'm not letting my friends know, because I'm not getting called crazy.
So before we go into any next happenings in the area, do you want to jump forward to where you had a conversation with one of your buddies as a grown man, and he asked, and the conversation that you guys had, it's pretty serious, and it's pretty clear that you explained that you guys were all part of clubs, your dads all were friends.
Yep.
And so that's a better explanation of why you didn't say anything, if you want to go into that.
Yeah, it was like, it was because, my best friend, his dad was, part of the fire department. My dad was part of the fire department. All the other kids that we hung around with, like I said, their moms and dads were with the fire department. Like I said, we're all the same, within that 14 to 17-year-old age group. And it was just, I'm not going to say nothing to nobody because of, the ridicule that I'll probably end up getting. But, I've stayed in, I talk to this guy every single day to this day. He went into the service. I went into the law enforcement. He retired. He did his 25 years in the Air Force and everything. And, so we've always stayed in, we have like 5 of us that in that little group that are, to this day, we still talk every day, text. And,
so what was his, that's the young man whose house you were walking to at the time. Yeah. So yeah. As a man talking to him later and saying, hey man, this is what happened to me. And he of course says, why didn't you tell me? That was your explanation of why you didn't. And then what did he say? Yeah, we would have made fun of you.
Yeah. I asked him, I was like, I says, not for nothing, I said, but I did see one. And he's like, well, why didn't you tell me? I was like, think about it. We're 14, 15 years old. I'm going to come to you and say, hey, you know what I saw walking up to your house? I saw a Bigfoot. And then what's the first thing that you're going to turn around and say or do after that leaves my lips? He says, oh, I would have told everybody you're nuts. Like, There you go. I was like, hey, and he's honest. He says, at that time, we're kids, we're not mature enough to, figure out what's going to happen down the road, so, he came right out and he says, no, but I believe you, he says.
Yeah, he believes you now as a man with
Now,
all the information that we all know about Sasquatch
right.
now. But so you actually probably made the best decision to not say something, because like he said, if you would have, who knows what dynamics would have changed amongst you and your friends if they started whispering behind your back about your sanity.
Well, exactly, because I didn't know at that point what career goals I was looking at that point. At that point, I'm 15 years old and the fire department is the greatest thing in the world. We get to ride out the trucks, we wash the trucks, we hang around with the older guys. It doesn't get better than that. When you're 15, we have the railroad tracks there that the trains run 3 times a day. When they come down in the summertime, they throw sparks off the rails because they're going so slow. They're so loaded up with, box cars and coal cars. They're throwing sparks. What are we doing all afternoon? I can't wait for the tone to go off. We're going to go out and, fight a brush fire now. It might only be 5 minutes long, but hey, it's cool. But, after that, I didn't think anything, of it. I went to into my career, and, I really don't think I thought about it until like 5 years ago when I started, I don't remember what really tricked me off about it or, started it up again. I think I was just going through YouTube, sitting home, and I caught something on Bigfoot. And I was like, well, that's cool. Then I looked at another one and then looked at another one. And then there was 5 that day. Then there was 10 the next day. And, this little stuff started popping up into my head that I'm remembering now, that these weird little things happened even when I was an adult, on the police force, married with kids, but never connected the dots.
So here's a map that you sent that has all of these things that you discovered later through BFRO reports. And in that area, the green oval circle to the right is the general area where you had things happen. And then all of these other areas in such close proximity is what you discovered later that other people have reported.
Right. So to go on with the evolvement of the story, talking to my wife one night, I don't know, last year, and I'm telling her about this whole thing, and she's like, she says, do you remember that time when the kids were little? We were at my mom's house, and my middle daughter, she had to be like, I don't know, 3 or 4. My other one was probably 5 or 6. All the kids are 2 years apart. And
Sorry to interrupt. I want everybody that's watching to look up there at the number 4. Where he's describing now is up there where the number 4 is. And so continue.
Okay, well, right where the number 4 is, if you go to the right of that number 4, where the developments stop, that was all pretty almost new right after this incident. So the property literally was woods into the state forest, or privately owned property that backed up to the state forest that was not developed yet.
So we'll just assume that in this picture right here, that little yellow cul-de-sac is what we're talking about. The red square is where the house was, and all of these other places weren't there.
Pretty much right. If they were there was only like 1 or 2. Okay. At that point, all the property was still pretty much undeveloped at the time yet. And she turns around and tells me, she says, well, you remember when the baby came in and said that that there was a hairy man watching them play in the backyard. And we're sitting there, me, my wife, my mother-in-law, and I could remember it because we laughed about it, And we said, man, the imagination on these kids is unbelievable. So they're like, no, Mom, we went out to the backyard. We looked around. The backyard wasn't, really, really big. It was probably 50 by 75, with woods on 3/4 of the sides of it, where, instead of where the house was. And it was thick. Go out there, looked around. There's nobody standing there. It's too thick for somebody to go through. Okay, they're happy. Go back out and play with your sister. A few minutes later, maybe 20 minutes later, she comes back in again and says, the hairy man's watching us play in the backyard. So boom, we jump up, we run out the back door, off the porch, and we look, and there's nothing there. So me and my wife, we walk the yard. There's nothing. Don't see anything. We're like, okay, she just wants attention. We walk back inside, and my mother-in-law is washing dishes. And I said, man, the imagination on these kids is just unbelievable. They will say anything to just get the attention. And my wife says, you remember what my mom said? And I was like, I know she says that. She's like, she just looked down and said, don't be so sure. And just ended the conversation. So it was like, my mother-in-law has passed on, so I have no way to, ask her about that now. But it was just very, did she know something? Because where she stood to wash dishes looked right into the backyard. In the exact area.
Sure makes you wonder.
Right. And, did she just never say anything to anybody? Has she seen something before? We don't know. But, it was said.
Well, I want to throw in here at this moment, if you guys remember the interview I did with the lady in Independence, just outside of Kansas City on the 100-acre farm, she had 12 kids. And one of her stories was the 2 and 3-year-olds come running around the house one time yelling Cookie Monster, Cookie Monster. And she said all they did was watch Sesame Street all day long. So that's what the only thing they had in their vocabulary to describe what a Bigfoot looked like was Cookie Monster.
That's what their interpretation was, a big Cookie Monster.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and then a little bit, besides her looking at me like, you're nuts type thing, and trying to get used to this whole thing, and always, kicking little side jokes and stuff like that. She's like, when we were kids in the area that she grew up in, where the number 4 is, they had a large group of kids in the neighborhood too. And they used to go down into the forest. There was a waterfall down there. That was the big place that the kids would like hang out. And she's like, she remembers her and her sister being in there a couple times. And she says, I know something was watching us, but we just got creeped out and we left. We just went home. She said it only happened a few times, but she's like, if you think about it, she's like, I never realized why I felt that way. We felt that way. We didn't feel right. And we left. We went back home. And I'm like, okay, let's put that part into my puzzle that I'm building here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say most people watching this right now, when you start to see the numbers on this map, and given the map where he shows all of these other things in the periphery, that's been reported by others, and it should paint a clear picture that a family, a troop, a clan, or even a singular Sasquatch lived in this area or regularly was there more than once.
Well, when I look back and I went into the you want to say the archives, I found one report that happened down in Shelton, and it was no more than 2 miles from my sighting on the same railroad tracks, but instead of in 1976, this one happened in 1953. There were a group of little kids, like 3 or 4 or 5 kids, going out to get blueberries and raspberries for breakfast in the morning for pancakes. And they were walking the tracks, and they said they saw something come down the hill that looked like a big monkey, a big hairy monkey. that didn't see them at first, walked in front of them for a couple minutes, noticed them, and then went back up the hill.
Well, then it's easy to, I mean, we're smart people. We're logical. We could say that they certainly were there all along. Even the first time someone built the first cabin in that area, they were probably there. They learned to live as we slowly encroached and did more building and more building. And they may still be there, even though it's hard to say because we keep taking over so much of the land. But man, I just, if there's, they could still be there, and they probably are in just a different way, or, staying hidden.
I mean, I've looked up more reports over the last, I'm gonna give it the last 10 years or so. And right from where I grew up, over to Bethel, I'm 15 minutes from Bethel. I'm 20 minutes from Bridgewater. Monroe, which is where I had my sighting in, which was part of Monroe. It's three sections: Monroe, Stepney, and Stevenson consists of Monroe. But from where I on the other side of town, a couple years ago, a guy heard howling at night, and he was from out west. He was here. I guess he was here visiting, but where he heard it from and where the reports are, you have one of three things in common. You have a river, a railroad track, or a power line. And most of the power line and railroad track reports are all on the same river, railroad track or power line. It's just different sections of it, but they're all within, I'd say, a 5 to 7 mile radius.
That is a great bit of information. Yeah.
And if if you find other people who say these things can travel 15 miles in a night going from one point A to point B, what's to say the guy in Bethel who reported it at 5 o'clock at night standing along his shed, and then the guy who called up in Monroe or Shelton that said, hey, I saw one at 11 o'clock walking through my backyard right by the railroad tracks. That's not impossible.
Right. And that's always been speculated, that we have a misconception with how many there are, because a lot of the sightings could be the same one, just in different areas.
Yeah, but even the way I was looking at it, my sighting. Okay, I'm 63 now. I was 14 then. So I was that's like 50 years ago that I saw one, and it was 23 years prior that group of kids saw one. And then I just from talking, I went to a graduation party about 3 weeks ago, and talking to one of my buddies who was in the neighborhood that my wife grew up in. He was one of the the kids in the clique up there, and he's a brother Mason. So we were talking, and he comes up and he's like, hey, he says, how's your Bigfoot sight going? I was like, it's going pretty good. He's like, he says, back in the 90s, he says, we were riding our quads on the railroad tracks west of where I had my sighting, probably about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from where I had my sighting on the same railroad tracks. Him and a girl friend of his were out riding quads, and she went up a little ways, he said, in front of him, and then she turned around and she was hauling coming back. And he's like, hey, what's going on? How come you're coming back? I was just going to catch up to you. She says, I had a Bigfoot run right across the tracks in front of me up around the corner. And he was like, yeah, no way. And he says, yeah. He says she swore up and down. He said this big hairy man thing ran right in front of her on the quad, she turned it around and hauled right back to where he was. And this is in the same couple of years where my daughter said the same thing about the hairy man in the yard. And this is only 2 miles from there.
Wow. Wow. Well, we've actually got another decent story that's still on the map that we haven't touched on yet. Do you guys see where the number 3 is? That is Eckler's Cove. And I am going to pull up a closer picture of that cove. And here it is right here. Now, this is modern day view of that cove. So take away all of those houses. At one point, if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was a mom and pop marina owned in that little cove, where just a mom and pop setup, where they had a few electricity-free cabins along the base of that ridge where people could rent and sleep in these cabins, and they had the marina. So just think, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, before it got modernized, what it was like to get down in there, and people would gravitate towards that area and stay in those cabins. But some things happened down there around that.
Yep, it was like right, on the picture where you can see the little green dot there. That's like where the boat ramp part is now. But that little group of trees to the left, and then you have that big development up there. That was a field. There was no houses up there, no anything. Right at the base of that tree line where you can see the tar, that's where these small, I call them summer cabins. No electricity, no water. They used to use generators, but it pushed right up against that tree line. But at that tree line, it went up about, I'd say maybe 75, 100 feet in about a 60-degree angle, very steep side of the mountain up onto that field. Well, right after I left the police department, they had a couple incidents where the people that were there, and it had to be around summertime because that's the only time they were really there. Wintertime, everybody took everything home and it just shut down. People were calling up reporting that the kids were screwing around up on top of the field, throwing rocks down on top of their cabins. So, it happened a few times. Cops were called. Cops got down there, couldn't find, anything going on. Probably, just kids messing around up there. Wasn't really a lot of kids in that neighborhood at this time, in this time of time. They did, their due diligence, drove around up around top, walked around, checked everything out, couldn't find anything. And that was it. But these rocks were like the size of baseballs and softballs. And there was one time that I heard that one of the detectives was down there during the daytime, because it happened again, and he was almost hit with a rock, where everybody, boom, everybody split, ran up top, tried to figure out, we'll catch them this time because we're here and it just happened. Could never find anybody. And
Wow.
And
that is crazy. Hey, that reminds me. I hope you don't mind me. It reminds me of stuff. A guy was talking to me about doing some catfishing at 2 or 3 in the morning on the Kansas River, not too far from me, and he said something was throwing baseball-sized rocks at us. He said you could hear them hit the mud, and he says there was a bunch of trees behind us, and then farm fields. There was farm fields beyond the trees. He said, I knew there were some kids up there that were lobbing some rocks at us. He said, so me and my buddy tore off through the woods to go up and catch whoever's chunking rocks at them. They get up in this field and they're panning it with lights, and there's nothing. So it just reminds me, it's almost identical. And that was here in Kansas.
Everything just started coming together, in the last, like I said, like 5 years, I started putting everything together. In the last year or so, I got a little bit more into it. I started, I put up the email address. I put up the Facebook page. I got a couple people, around that have told me different things around here. Um, we've had a lot of reports right in this area that aren't on any of the other sites. Um, there was one that I pulled off the site where the guy was describing the river he was on, the farm that he was on, not saying where it is, but because of the description that he gave, I knew exactly where it was. I mean, and it's right, it's right there along the Housatonic River, but it's on the other side of the river. How could they get it close across? There's areas where you could literally wade across. It's not deep everywhere. If they're brazen enough, they could go over at night over a bridge, things like that. But
Well,
this gave,
Karl,
but
Carl, I'm going to throw this out at you. There's a park, a national park across the river. The Missouri River is what my town lives alongside, and it's a pretty fast flowing deep river. It's because it'll hold barges and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I think it flows at 8 to 10 miles an hour. And across the way, there's a park called Weston State Bend Park. And about 10 or 12 years ago, I went over there because of some reports that I had read on the BFRO from the Fort Leavenworth side. These are on each side of each other on the same river. And so I went over and talked to them and told them I'm not shy about talking about Bigfoot. And I was going to ask them if I could put some game cams along the river there in the park. And they're like, well, you need to talk with the head ranger here. And she was a female. So I went down the hall to talk to her, and she shut the door to her office. And I told her, I said, I had a close encounter with 2 Bigfoots. This is what I want to do. I just live over here in Leavenworth. And she said, oh, well, you'd be interested in what I've got to show you then. And I said, what? She said, we found some tracks along on our side of the river. And there were some 1969 and 1970 reports from the Fort Leavenworth side where some military guys had seen some tracks down in the woods along the Fort Leavenworth there. So she said we had 8 tracks, and she showed me the picture of it. And my God, I wish I would have got a copy if she would have gave me one. But it looked like your typical Bigfoot print. And she said there were 8 tracks, and they go into the water. And she said they never came out. So whatever this is crossing the river, a strong flowing deep river. So they must be excellent swimmers. And she said, I'm not saying this is a Bigfoot track. She said, but if it's a bear track, it's grizzly bear. And she's talking about the state of Kansas and
Right.
Missouri, a grizzly bear. So
yeah, it just makes you, it makes you think. I'm trying to actually get a hold of the one up in Bridgewater, because this guy who reported it, I'm assuming he's probably in his early 40s now, but according to him, his father has seen one and his grandfather has seen one. So, on the same property. And, over the years, it was a family farm, 300 acres, which, over the years, they've, given some to the town. They've sold off some acreage and everything. They have a few acres left. But, I'd love to be able to just go up there and find out what I'm planning on doing. I'm making some flyers and sticking them in, the local delis.
that's a great idea. Hey, Karl, Leah Duran asked, have you heard any reports that involved anything other than a lone male?
No,
Like youngsters or female with youngsters?
no, haven't heard anything like that. The only thing that I've personally heard was just a couple years back, maybe 2-3 years ago, when I was living in a different section of Sandy Hook up by the Chippewa River at the north end of Lake Zor, where it meets Lake Leonona. There's a big farm across the lake. The lake's only about 150 yards wide at this point, and then there's the big farm. A lot of it's open field, a lot of it's heavy forest. And I let the dog out one night and didn't think nothing of it. It's probably about 7 o'clock at night, nice and quiet. You don't hear nothing. All of a sudden, I hear this roar, yip, and then roar, yip, and this was like 400 or 500 yards across the lake from me, deep into the woods is where it came from. But it sounded like it was 100 feet in front of me.
Yeah, well, you know, there can't be that many sightings of lone male Sasquatch. Some of them may have been female. You just can't tell, I suppose. So that, I mean, if there's one, then there has to be two, and there has to be a breeding, there has to be at least a breeding pair to have the length of time, stretch of time that you're talking about from the 1950s. They were certainly there before the 1950s also. So they can't be there that long and not have an actively breeding local population. So it's just fascinating.
Everything just started coming together when I started putting, locations and then areas of locations, and this one's connected to this one, connected to the next one by this means of travel. And I'm like, you could drive to all these spots in 3 hours from where I'm located. That's how centralized these places are.
Yeah, well, I want to encourage anybody that's listening to this and that will listen to it later. If you're from up and around that area, especially if you've had anything happen that you've got questions about, reach out to Karl with the Connecticut Bigfoot page on YouTube. What's your goal? I know your goal is probably no different than mine, just to find answers. And so you do that the best way you can. But do you have any for your website, for your Facebook page, would you encourage people that don't live in that area to join up and just become a part of the information that you're trying to collect?
All information is welcome. Like I said, I'm not gathering information and hoarding it in a folder, for my eyes only type thing. Somebody wants to know something, I have no problem saying, this was here and that was there and that's what I saw on this date. It's going to be out there. It's
well, that might be the location for people to gravitate towards if they've got any questions, especially in that area, because if you're going to be open with what's going on there, if somebody says, hey, I was driving down such and such road and this happened while I was in my car or whatever, you can say, well, I'm friends. Somebody reported from that farm right there on that road that there's stuff going on, and maybe you can make connections for people to at least figure out what's going on. And being open about the information is always paramount. I mean, there's too many people that try to hide stuff like locations and stuff like that. To me, that's just kind of silly, because nobody's out running anybody's property and things like that. They're just online trying to find answers. And so I don't try to hide locations. I think it's important because that gives people answers and lets them see what's going on.
Right. I mean, I'm not going to hoard any information. Somebody wants to know something, they can contact me. I'll let them know, exactly. And as much as I know about it. Truthfully, I mean, being out in the woods, I haven't been out in the woods a lot. I don't remember seeing any kind of structures. I've never seen a footprint that I could remember was a footprint. Things like that. Like I said, the only thing I've heard was those two howls that one time. Given the location, the time, and where it was, it wasn't a cow, mooing, or a bull mooing, or a pig out in the farm thing. It was in the middle of the woods, and to hear something that loud from far away, there was no like you hear people saying, "Oh, I felt it in my chest," type of go through my body. It was nothing like that. It was strictly, this is what I heard. but the decibel level of it from so far away was amazing. And it was a living thing. It wasn't a man-made, sound tinny or metallic, or this was something flesh and blood made this sound. What it was, I don't know.
All right. Well, Karl, we just broke the hour time mark. I mean, I don't have any set limits, but I feel like we've covered just about everything that you ever sent me that I looked at and looked at the maps and went over. Is there anything else you want to add to this? I mean, are you satisfied? Have I asked enough questions of you? Have you feel like that we've missed out on anything?
Yeah, I mean, you went pretty much over everything that I have. Everything I have, I wrote down. I took pictures and sent them to you right out of my notes. It wasn't something I added. This is my notes. If something happens, I jot down date, time, place, and I write down a general, information. I got a binder that I just fill out.
Then I have a question for you. In your police service, where you worked with the other policemen or sheriff's departments, did anybody come forward in your recollection of something that could be Bigfoot related, as far as reported by people that they went out and checked on or things like that?
Never. Nobody ever came out and said Bigfoot, Sasquatch. We were so rural out there that
it would always come in as a
prowler.
Yeah.
And you go out there and you go way down the end of the driveway, and they got the one porch little light on, and the barn's in the back, and somebody, something was tapping on the back of my the back over by the patio, and we didn't know what it was. We didn't know if somebody's trying to get in or what. And at that time, you're looking for a person that's not supposed to be there doing something wrong. In hindsight, right, if I would have been more aware of what all this other stuff was, I might have been more conscious of a smell, a sound, a footprint, some sort of evidence left that I could say, okay, we'll keep an eye on it, ma'am. But back in the back of my head, it's like there was no prowler here. It was something else.
It's funny that you say that, because I did a report down in Arbuckle Lake of Oklahoma, where I talked to a camp host, and the previous night there was 2 adult women with a bunch of children camping where you parked your vehicle and had to take a long, windy trail down by the lake to have a lone campsite in a cove. And that's where they were camping. And he said around midnight the night before, one of the ladies was beating on his camper door and claiming that there was somebody standing in the ravine next to their campsite, looking into their campsite. And so I was talking to him about Bigfoot in the area, told him about my encounter not too far from there. And he said it probably was a Bigfoot. He said, but we had to treat it as a suspicious person.
Yep.
He said, so we pulled all of them up to the roadside. We called the rangers, the park rangers went down there and investigated. But when it went into a report, it was a suspicious person. It's never Bigfoot, even though a lot of times it may be Bigfoot.
I have a close friend that I've been in law enforcement with since the beginning of his career. He's got a little bit, maybe a few months, maybe a year left, that works for DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, the Forest Encon Police. And, I just called him up one day. I said, can you give me a call? I got to run a question about, something. This is about 3 months ago. And he's like, okay. So he calls me up and I say, I'm going to ask you something. I was like, in your time here, I said, you've been all over the state of Connecticut. I says, you guys get all the, animal calls and everything, your game wardens. I was like, anybody ever, report some weird things, somebody tapping on the house, you can't find it, or, saying they seen something that it really wasn't a bear, but they couldn't tell what it was. And he came right out. He was like, "You mean like Bigfoot?" And I was like, "Yeah, exactly." His answer couldn't have been any quicker. Nope, nope, nope. Never comes in Connecticut. There's nothing like that here. So short and cut off that I just like, okay, I'll accept what you say.
Well, maybe the people here that's watching this can remember the interview I did with John Milesinski. I didn't do an interview. It was just a presentation that he gave, and he worked for the Yellowstone areas of, and he had an encounter, and his bosses specifically told him, "Zip it.
Yep.
Your job, if you want to keep your job, you're not going to pursue this." Or it's amazing. We know they're out there. Whatever we can guess beyond that is just a guess, but they know they're out there.
The only thing other than that, I do have a dedicated email, which is all one word. It's ctbigfootresearch@gmail.com. And then our Facebook page is Connecticut Bigfoot Research.
So people, go join if you want to stay on top of what's happening in that area, or help out if you can, especially if you've had something happen. Certainly do that, and you will only add to the information, and that adds value to what we're trying to figure out here.
Yep, all my information, like, for other guys looking and people looking, I mean, it's an open book. You want to know something, if I have the info, I'll give it to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, or it's out there.
All right. Well, very good, Karl. Man, thank you so much. I think this really went well. I hope you like my format of, I dig into your business and I pull your business up here on so everybody can see it. I mean,
you did good.
Sometimes people are a little shocked. They're like, "Wow, you really deep dived onto my page." But that's what I do. I want to make sure that I get everything out there for everybody to see what's happening.
Yep.
All right. Well, then I guess we will sign off, buddy. And I appreciate you.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Randy. Have a good one.
You too.
For the